Welcome back in time with Rick Clunn. We're going back now to September, October of 1972. Again, I want to reemphasize, I'm a fan following the sport. I'm learning about it. I'm watching it evolve, and that's why I'm kind of going back in this and why doing these, because I think it's important. I know young people tend to devalue old people's ideals and the past and how it was, and that it's not valid anymore. And that may be partially true, but it's not totally true. There's a lot of the stuff that going back in time makes it very valid to be aware of in the future of what you're doing and how much you want to do it. This one, the cover, I find kind of interesting because what you're going to see, as we've noticed throughout so far this journey, is that here's a big fish with a fillet knife. and that, of course, that became one of us hardcore fishermen. We hated to see that when we went to marinas and stuff, and there'd be there guys filleting fish. And that didn't mind me filleting the small ones, but when they were filleting the big ones, because I'd filleted a few big ones in my life, and they're not the best eating ones, okay? And they really are your biggest spawners and reproducers. So even before catch and release, I wouldn't, I wouldn't fillet the bigger fish. I'd fillet, because I love to eat fish. It's my number one favorite food, it's fish. And so don't think that I am anti, eating fish. But this is, again, it's just through the evolution, this will disappear. You will see more and more of the fish, but they won't be dead like these. They'll be alive. And you'll see fewer and fewer fillet knives actually in the magazine itself. So the other thing is, and this is just, some things I find amusing, because this, again, remember, we're tracing the evolution of the bass fishing sport. And the boats are changing really, relatively speaking, very, very fast from even when they were a year and a half, 2 years ago. You're seeing more things. You're seeing the industry really try to make them truly a fishing machine by putting in rod holders and anchors and troll motors. But here's the other things you're seeing is these guys aren't wearing hats. Why aren't you wearing a hat? This still to this day is one of my most irritating things I see sometimes sponsors do when they hire advertising agencies that they don't know fishing, so they will pull that trick on you in one of your ads if you don't have somebody editing it or monitoring it. You shouldn't go out fishing. We know that nowadays. Everybody knows without a hat. And these guys at least have the reels, hold it right instead of upside down, which you'll see in the reeling backwards. But that's just the humor of how the marketing side and the advertising side they're not as educated as the people that are doing the fishing. They will become that way over time, better, at least better. In my journey back through time is, it's kind of interesting for me to refresh my memory about when a lot of this actually took place. And this basic article, 1972, was about bass in California. And at this point in time, a really big bass in California was 8 pounds. And you had very few over 8. And essentially, California, they claimed, did not even have bass until they started stocking them. And those bass they stocked came from Vermont, in that part of the country. Well, by now we know that all bass that live up north in that cold water, which have to go through 5 or 6 months of very cold water, don't grow as fast. We know that the fish in Florida has always been they grow very fast. And and finally, I think I'm going to look at the dates here. It was wait a minute. Really? I'm trying to, excuse me, it was 1870, no wait a minute, it can't be. It says, but that's what it says. It says 1874 that they came from Vermont and Michigan. They stayed to stock bass in California. 1874? Okay, I'm just going to go with what it says here. It wasn't until 1959 that the southern part of California around San Diego brought fish from Florida. And they immediately started getting bigger. So, and then of course now we know that some of the biggest bass are, you know, come from California. And we also know a lot of the other reasons. It's not just a Florida species by itself versus a northern species. It's also that a lot of those lakes in California had trout and a huge protein food for them. And so they really got, now that's why you've seen probably as many 20-pounders come from California as you've seen from anywhere, was due to that. But this was, again, all back in 1972 that this is going on. And again, this one here is sad, but again, back then, bass was really still, even though you didn't read it, you didn't buy your magazine to read this stuff, they're really still fighting pollution. And don't stand by and let a friend die. It's really kind of neat, and and they really made a legitimate effort. It wasn't just, you know, pretending so we look good to the public. They really, that, and again, I applaud the Bass Nations. They probably were really the workers that did most of the work. We pushed it, we promoted it, we publicized it, but they were the ones who were really doing the work. And something I've learned in our short journey here, going back in time, I've been reading some of Grisham's stuff. He was an amazing writer. He would be an amazing writer today. His grasp of things, and he didn't come off like a lot of writers do, sometimes as a know-it-all. He didn't. He really was looking at the situation and judging it in a very subjective, open-minded, positive way. And this article again he was tracing again bass fishing tournaments were kind of being frowned on. A lot of people liked them, a lot of people didn't like them, and the numbers of them were definitely increases. And here's some ideals that were coming out to try to make all these fishermen out there that the locals thought were catching all their fish look a little better. And it's that they would carry a litter bag and they had to bring it full back to check-in or they couldn't weigh their fish in. Which, that was a neat idea. It would have been one I'd have been flustered with, because for me, losing one or two casts was just not tolerable. But and then also the other thing that showed up, it was people started bringing egg cartons to tournaments. Right? And what's fascinating, some of you already figured this one out, but it was actually because that's the same time that Fred Young and them were hand carving big O's, which were real fragile bait, balsa wood baits. And they wouldn't put them in a tackle box. They put them in egg cartons and bring them to the boat. I love that one. I love that one because those big O's back then, believe it or not, you know, everybody thinks lures are high now. Those big O's were costing $50 a piece back then. So these guys were trying to take care of them. I've really enjoyed this. I hope you all have enjoyed it as much, but I doubt you enjoyed it as much as me, because I actually look at a lot of things that I find amusing that I'm not even talking about in these magazines. But here's again one of my favorites, Stan Fagerstam. He, you know, the genius artistic caster, and you do notice he has on a hat, but it's really kind of a strange hat. I think it's plastic. And he definitely wanted to make sure that his partner didn't even knew where his head was, that bright color he had on. But in what this article is about is that the one tournament fishing outlawed every natural live type bait. Dead or alive, you couldn't use that, with the exception of one. And do y'all know which one that was? It was pork rind. You know, and I used a lot of it, especially on the jig and what we call jig. Back then we called it jig and pig for that reason, because it was pork. You know, everybody goes jig and pig, well, you know. But anyway, and you cut it up. There was guys that made their own. I don't know where they got the pork. Went to the butcher, got the pork, made their own pork rind. But then you could buy Uncle Josh pork, and there were several other brands. And they made them into trailers for spinnerbaits, trailers for jigs, things like that. So it was kind of the only negative to pork was that if you laid it down on your boat and didn't fish it for about 30, 40 minutes, it'd get dry and get stiff. And that's why it finally got phased out by you know, plastics, soft plastics. They got softer, and now you hardly ever see anybody using pork rind. All right, this again is the first year of catch and release, and always we'll go through kind of the tournaments just to look at the people back then. This one was at Tennessee, I think at Watts Bar. And look who won, Roland Martin. Look who was third, Bob B. Murray. And I want to point out who was fourth, because during those days, and actually up until probably the 90s, Blake Honeycutt was one of the top 3 deepwater fishermen in the world. And I actually got the pleasure of fishing with him one time, and we jigged spoons 25 foot and caught a limit in about 15 minutes. That was a 10 fish limit too. But here's another name, and I like to point these guys out. I'm a little biased, but Johnny Morris was 11th. This is 1972. You know, he was still trying to talk his dad into supporting his fishing tackle business. And then Forrest Wood, you know, who was flipping Arkansas. He was 30th. And there's a lot of other guys I know here, but I just kind of like to follow those guys and re-educate myself about, hey, these guys were fishermen before they were, you know, entrepreneurs. Well, that's September, October 1972. Thank you.